My challenge was to develop a sustainable mining policy that fits into the PNG experience. And the first question I had to ask myself was, what is a policy? And policy breaks down into two components. One is it's a statement of an important issue, and secondly, policy provides a framework for addressing that important issue. So the issue for mining is basically threefold. They overlap, but it's an issue that's shared in the sector worldwide. It's an issue that's still pervasive in Canada, the country that I'm from, where mining is a big component of the economic structure. The first is the uneven distribution of economic, environmental, and social benefits and costs. Secondly, the uneven distribution of environmental, social, and economic impacts and risks, which are different from costs and benefits, as you're well aware. And third, the uneven distribution of all of the above across space, across PNG, and through generations, from our generation to future generations. So those are the issues that sustainable development attempts to address. The framework that I've developed is based upon a long history of the global attempt to deal with sustainable development, starting in 1992 with the Rio Conference in Rio. The initiative since '92 has been to develop within the UN a framework for countries to develop sustainable development strategies to implement on a country-by-country basis. The first kind of goals associated with that were the Millennium Development Goals that expire in 2015. The objective of those goals was basically to alleviate poverty. They were focused more on in terms of social welfare and quality of life. They will be followed by the Sustainable Development Goals that will kick in 2015 as the follow-up to the Millennium Development Goals that will have a stronger environmental component to complement the social component of the Millennium Development Goals. We used PNG's Vision 2050, which in effect is PNG's country sustainable development strategy pursuant to these UN initiatives. And it was the PNG Vision 2050 that required that all sectors within PNG develop a sustainable development policy. Hence, my assignment for the mining sector to develop a sustainable mining development policy. The objective of the PNG 2050 is to raise PNG from a low income to a middle income country by 2050. So there is a distribution element of that. The implementation phase of the Vision 2050 is PNG's development strategic plan, whereby each sector has key indicators and targets set for development to fulfill the Vision 2050 aspirations. We also looked at the department's strategic plan, and you've seen an overview of their vision statement and their mission statement to improve the quality of life. And I also looked at various sector initiatives, the private sector initiative, where companies have developed sustainable development initiatives. Looked at the lender community, the EIR, which was the extractive industry review that took place at the turn of the century, that basically set the conditions for financial institutions to be involved in the extractive sector in the developing world. And finally, the IGF, which is basically the public sector, or the government arm, relating to how best to develop the mineral sector in their respective countries. So what I basically did was try and digest all of this information, along with initial scoping meetings that took place in May of this year at Akteti and the Nissima area, and come up with a sustainable mining development policy that would work in the PNG context. The elements of the framework, there's four key elements, basic elements. One is there's no silver bullet, there's no single template about how you do sustainable development. And the positive side of that is it gives each project an opportunity to develop its own sustainable mining development program. Governance is a key driver. You've heard that this morning. If there's no intent and there's no structures in place to facilitate better performance, you're not going to achieve the aspired for performance. A key element of the framework, because there isn't a single template, is that we've identified principles that would basically drive the intent of sustainable development. And finally, what I didn't want to do was to be another consultant that came in and basically made recommendations on new legal, fiscal, regulatory, or administrative regimes. I wanted to work with what you already have, but in the context of what's being reviewed since 2009. So what we've come up with is, and I'll run through these quickly, and I'll focus on the principle and just use one example about how your existing support structures may be used differently in order to better facilitate this issue of, or address the issue of unevenness. So governance principle 1, and these are pretty obvious. We all think about it from time to time, but what we're trying to do here is put it together and tie it to the existing support structures in PNG. First one, the overriding one, is early attention to the immediate, medium-term, and future economic, social, and environmental performance of the mining project. See, the focus is on the mining project, not the mining sector. And if you looked at how the Mining Act is structured now, probably the most appropriate place to address that is at the development forum during the tenement application process. So it would be at the development forum, referring to this one down here, where you would set those immediate, medium-term, and long-term performance indicators or outcomes for a project. Just a comment, it's been interesting. What you'll see here is a sequence that everybody has seen in the previous 3 forums, and based upon the feedback that I've obtained and listening to the questions, the sequencing of these principles will change pretty significantly. The principles will remain the same in the final report. Governance principle 2, identify and strengthen linkages between economic, social, and environmental performance of the mining project. The discussions have been pretty steady in terms of, okay, there's royalty payments and there's production levies and et cetera. What happens with that money? And we have EITI that says, well, this is the money that's been paid by the project to the government, to the landowners, et cetera. But there's other steps that need to be taken, whereby the fiscal regime to evolve to align with the cost of sustainable development. You need that feedback loop such that the monies that are generated by extractive industry support the social and environmental infrastructure that's necessary for a post-mining socioeconomic system. Mining will not be the basis of long-term sustainable development. It will be the seed financing for that, and the legacy that mining leaves will set the table for what that socioeconomic system would look like. 3, when you look at whether it was the private sector, the lender community, or the governments, it basically said that you need a level playing field on environmental and social performance to be competitive with other countries. And the recommendation, or most companies in this country adhere to the IFC performance standards, or what you hear is that commonly is the Equator Principles. BSP, your biggest bank, is owned now by IFC, and a lot of its investments are compliant with the IFC performance standards. DEC, that provides the environmental permit for mining projects, uses the Equator Principles as the evaluation criteria for signing off on a project. 4, early establishment of priority strategic areas to focus efforts and investments over the mining project life cycle. The idea here being that if you have a long-term view, your objective is to convert natural capital, the ores, the gold, the copper, the nickel in the ground, to human capital. And the transition in terms of that conversion to human capital is building up the social infrastructure in the country. 5, clarity of stakeholder roles and responsibilities. You heard a lot about that this morning. You'll hear a lot about it this afternoon on involuntary resettlement and mine closure. Clearly, if your target is to improve the performance and deal with unevenness, you really need to designate roles and responsibilities for that to happen. It isn't going to happen by itself. So again, the development forum jumps out at you as being the venue for which not only would you identify the short-term, medium, and long-term performance expectations for a project, you could basically designate the roles and responsibilities of various stakeholders at that particular time. 6, use existing support structures. As I said earlier, I didn't want to change the legal regime, the fiscal regime, the regulatory framework, or the administrative framework. But if you look at it, you have a process that's pretty clear, the tenement application process, the approvals process, tenement grant process or license, then you have the mine development contract, you have the MOA, you have compensation agreements. And really, what you can do better in terms of all of these existing support structures is sequence them in a way such that one informs the other. Having them take place in parallel and not connected to each other basically is a huge missed opportunity in terms of addressing the issue of unevenness. 7, you're not going to be able to achieve an improved performance unless you can measure it. So if you look at the P&G Development Strategic Plan, they basically have the metrics in there that they wish would be used by all sectors within the country. That basically identifies key indicators. What is it that you're trying to achieve? For example, improve education levels in the mining area. You have appropriate baseline. You can see the discussion this morning in terms of the exploration license that you include social mapping. So instead of just going out collecting geological data to see if you have a commercial project in the future, you're collecting baseline data to identify potentially affected area people and landowners. And finally, there's time-bound targets about when do I want to achieve these key indicators. So you've set up a mechanism whereby you're starting to measure the performance of projects. 8 is the issue of verification. Verification is important, obviously, because you need to verify that where you're going to, the progress you're making, the progress you're not making, and when you've reached the end point. And again, the P&G Development Strategic Plan has a methodology for verification which breaks down into monitoring and evaluation, reporting, and disclosure. Many of you do that now, whether you're a company, landowners, etc. But this is more a project-wide approach. 9. Why it's 9 instead of 10, I don't know. We just stopped at 9. This is where it is. I think this is, for me, this, in terms of all my experience in the mining sector, is that sustainable development has 2 components to it that are equally important. We tend in life to focus on one at the expense of the other, and that, to me, is just a missed opportunity. Compliance is what we were talking about this morning, which is conformity to a set of requirements, laws, regulations, permits, licenses, etc. It's necessary. Those are the things that we know, those are the things we can touch, those are the things we can get our arms around today. But when you're talking about sustainable development, future generations, we don't know what they want. So these are aspirational. So Vision 2050 in the P&G Strategic Development Plan is aspirational. There are some targets, but a lot of them are aspirational. So it's important to keep in mind that these 2 are equally important in terms of any mining project. Where it really gets interesting on this is in terms of roles and responsibilities and who's responsible for compliance and who's responsible for aspirations. But it does make for better projects when one focuses on that. And the last slide, the summary, is basically when we're looking at sustainable mining development policies, what we're attempting to do in the draft is to align Vision 2050 and the P&G Strategic Development Plan with mining performance. And it's mining performance in terms of the economic, the environmental, and social benefits, costs, impacts, and risks are distributed. So I think it's very powerful if you apply these 9 principles to the existing support structures that you have. The chances of dealing with unevenness in a better way than we do now are much enhanced. That's it. Thank you.